and the lowest reading since June 2020. Guys, think about this. How were things in June of 2020? Doesn't that just tell you how bad things are? And doesn't that tell you how much the data is manipulated that comes from the government? Yet more data is being revealed that the Canadian economy is absolutely imploding. We're going to get into this data and explain exactly why this proves the point that the economy is imploding, even though the government continues to manipulate their data. So let's get right into it. Canadian Services PMI hits 3-year low on uncertain outlook. What are they talking about here? I thought the economy was just on fire, guys. It was absolutely booming. We have nothing to worry about here. But according to this, it looks like things are a little bit uncertain. So the downturn in Canada's service sector deepened in November as increased borrowing costs and worries about a potential recession weighed on activity. S&P Global Canada Service PMI data showed on Tuesday. This was released a couple of weeks ago. But what I want to talk about in particular is when you actually look at what is going on. So if we flip over here and we go to Google Trends, which we know is kind of a good barometer to look at in terms of to see whether people are actually thinking that there's going to be a recession on the horizon. And you look at what's happening with Google Trends data, and as you can see, it's not really doing a lot. If you look at back in 2022, it was much, much higher. We had search volume that was much, much higher than it is right now. And this would kind of go with the thing that we would think, which is that most people are trying to be in this state of hope that the economy is going to be okay. There's going to be some soft landing. They're just going to cut interest rates and everything's going to be fine. The economy is just going to boom. And we'll get into why that isn't true a little bit later on when they talk about how prices are coming back down, because I want to highlight what it's took to get to that point, because that's really important to understand and realize. So anyway, let's flip back to this. The headline business activity fell to 44.5 in November from 46.6 in October. It was the 6th straight month that the index was below the 50 threshold. Below 50 indicates a deterioration in activity and the lowest reading since June 2020. Guys, think about this. How were things in June of 2020? I mean, my God, doesn't that just tell you how bad things are? And doesn't that tell you how much the data is manipulated that comes from the government? I mean, the GDP data that we just had, it was revised because the government's deficit shot over. When the government spends more money, guess what? That goes into the GDP numbers. The GDP numbers, they're not the most accurate thing in the world, but they kind of give us a sense of how the economy is doing well. But since government spending now accounts for such a large percentage of GDP, you just can't use these numbers anymore. It's the same with the unemployment numbers and the birth-death model. It's just absolutely nuts, guys. It really is. So anyway, let's continue on here. Market conditions are soft, characterized by squeezed budgets and a degree of reticence among market participants to commit to new business given an uncertain economic outlook. So once again, I mean, this doesn't sound good. If you look at it on the actual chart, it just looks even worse, in my opinion. When you look at the chart, it really shows you how bad things are just getting. This services PMI, the chart only goes back as far as 2021. So, you know, that's not giving us a great barometer on where things are going. But as you can see, it's going below where it even was in 2021. So this is just not a good sign. And all this data, guys, is not data from the government. And that's what I want to highlight. Because if you look at data which isn't coming from the government, it paints a totally different story to the data that the government is producing. And a lot of people are stuck in hope. And obviously we know the last shoe to drop in this will be unemployment. That always comes last. Considering what we've had happen over the past couple of years with stimulus and people retiring, there is more of a labor hoarding component in this recession than any other recession, in my opinion, because people are scared to let their workers go, considering what's going on. And I don't think you're going to see the blue collar jobs really shed that much at all, because there's just going to be labor shortages in those skills for a long time. High interest rates were again reported as a factor depressing market activity, and there are some concerns that the economy could drop into a recession in 2024. Well, I thought we were heading for a soft landing, didn't you guys? I thought we were heading for the no landing. Don't even worry about a soft landing. It's just going to be, there's going to be no landing at all. The economy is just going to land softly. They're just going to gently bring down interest rates again, because just ridiculous. It has never happened in history before. Why is it going to happen this time? Why are people talking about it like it's a common thing that happens? It's just unbelievable. It really is. You've got realtors, mortgage brokers who are just stuck in this state of hope, I think, for their own jobs and careers, let's point out there. So the Canadian economy unexpectedly contracted at an annualized rate of 1.1% in the third quarter, avoiding a recession but showing growth stumbling ahead of a Bank of Canada interest rate decision on Wednesday. I think we all know on this channel, we're all smart enough to figure out that we're in a recession. And I think we're heading into a depression. By the time they tell us we're in a recession, we will be in a depression. And as that saying goes, like I've said before, it's a recession when your neighbor loses their job, but when you lose your job, it's a depression. And that will really hit people next year. But we've also got all the cost pressures, all the cost of living increases that have happened in Canada that are really weighing on consumers as well. The inflation of the past couple of years, the amount their incomes have actually dropped. I've shown you charts of that before. All that is just a bad recipe when you really think about it. So signs of cooling inflation pressures were a bright spot in the data. The prices changed index dipped to 53.7, its lowest level since August 2021, while the input prices index was at 60, down from 62.5 in October. August 2021, when you really think about it, yeah, inflation came down back then, but I remember that I was in Vancouver Island in September 2021. I did a couple of videos that were on the beach out there in Parksville, and I was talking about how this is just the beginning of inflation, and we were starting to see the inflation that was really picking up then. There were these couple of months that were an anomaly, but still the trend was higher. Now, I think that prices are going to continue to come down at this point. We're going to continue to see disinflation. So prices aren't actually going to come down. They're just going to not accelerate at the pace we've seen before. But really, the reality is, guys, you have to think it took 5% interest rates to bring prices down, and they still haven't got prices under control. So inflation is still a major problem. They don't understand the dynamic between wages and inflation, because they think wages are actually a lot higher than they are because the inflation data is manipulated. You can't really blame the Bank of Canada for that one, because it is the government that supplies them with this data, but obviously they know it's highly manipulated and they're basing their monetary policy decisions off that. But when you really think about this inflation is coming down narrative, I think people just forget what it's took to bring inflation down. Essentially pushed the economy into a depression, create massive unemployment, which we're yet to see but will come at some stage, create a potential economic crisis. We've had banks failing, liquidity crises. You know, we've had all these different things that have happened, and that is what it took to bring inflation down. So the narrative that, oh, they're just going to drop rates when inflation gets to 2% and everything is going to be okay is just the most ridiculous one that I've heard. But again, it's wishful thinking by mortgage brokers and realtors that are all over YouTube. There's an absolute surplus of them, unfortunately, as most people know. So anyway, it's kind of crazy what's going on there. And now I want to take you over to the manufacturing PMI. We talked about this a little bit last week, but it's a very important component for the economy. Again, this doesn't come from the government. This comes from S&P Global. And this is executives and CEOs who have been surveyed and of told to give their outlook on what they think is going to happen in their specific sector. And in manufacturing in particular, you can see that their outlook is not good. So we know that there's a labor hoarding going on there, because when you look at the unemployment data and you put two and two together, you suddenly realize that, hey, there is a lot of people in manufacturing, like manufacturing jobs have increased quite a bit. And if we start to see any problems in that sector, which we're already seeing, because you can look at this chart right here and you can see it, guess what's going to happen to them? You're going to see job cuts in that sector as well. So it's not very good. And then the small business barometer is just terrible, guys. It really is. There's no way of putting it. Absolutely crashing. It's at its lowest level. I mean, if you pull this thing out, you can see that literally we have not seen it tanking this much since we've been in a recession. You were looking at the last time it was at this level was in the 2008 recession or in the 2020 mini recession. I mean, that is just absolutely terrible and a sign of what's to come. And we know, obviously, the CBA loans, there's a repayment deadline. They've got all these loans and debt that they built up during the pandemic. So there is a serious problem with small businesses right now, and small businesses account for a lot of the employment. Yes, we have these oligarchs. Yes, we have these massive corporations in Canada, but a lot of the employment still is small businesses. And when you look at small business confidence, it is terrible. It is absolutely terrible. There is no good way of putting this. So that is not a good sign at all. And then when you look at this, third quarter business delinquencies up 3.4% from previous quarter, says Equifax Canada. So again, this is just reinforcing what we've seen with the small business outlook. So the report by Equifax Canada says overall delinquencies for businesses in the third quarter rose 3.4% compared with the previous quarter, signaling potential challenges in debt repayment. Again, it's not just about these CBA loans. They took on a lot of debt. I mean, I was even watching a story the other day of this yoga studio and this person who she kept believing the government essentially that everything's going to be okay. We're going to be reopening again. And they kept having these false starts. And it was in Calgary that, oh, we're reopening. No, we're not. We're reopening. No, we're not. And they kept literally doing the rug pull. And a lot of business owners, because of that, were taking on more and more debt. So that is a significant problem. And I think you're going to continue to see business bankruptcies and delinquencies that are going to rise. And how does that not lead to further unemployment? I mean, depending on how they can manipulate the numbers, we'll continue to watch as we cover the labor reports on a monthly basis on this channel. But when you really think about what's going on, it does not paint a good picture of the economy, does it? It's really, really bad. And I wanted to show you this. This is kind of a really good leading indicator of a recession. So Jesse Felder put this on Twitter. It's really, really good. And it's basically talking about the drop in RV shipments. Now, obviously, you had this massive spike. So you had the 2020 mini recession that was right here. And then you essentially had the boom because of all the stimulus. And now it's absolutely tanking. And if you look at how rapidly this has tanked, it is quite severe. When you really think about it, from 2022 to 2023, this is a huge drop. So I think this is showing really what's going on with the older generations, because a lot of the people who are buying RVs, they're not young demographics. It's usually older people that are buying these RVs. Now, there are young people obviously buying RVs. Don't get offended by that comment. But a lot of the target people who are buying these RVs are particularly older people who want to go to warmer places and want to be able to take all the niceties from home. The RVs dropping kind of shows you what's going on with their wealth, because the thing is, even the people who've been retiring throughout 2020, 2021, and 2022, and even into 2023, they'll be the last affected by the recession, but they will be affected as well. So a lot of people who are retiring, in my opinion, are probably retiring at a terrible time, because it's not a good time when you're in this inflationary environment anyway to move on to fixed income, because obviously it's not going to rise rise with the level of inflation. Maybe it is if you have a government pension. But the RV shipments dropping this much, it really shows and tells you a story of what's going on in the economy. So it's interesting, guys, and I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you're looking for a VPN, you know where to go. Go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Use a VPN to get around these stupid censorship laws in Canada. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this video here. You might like this playlist here. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, guys. Bye-bye.